Recording, bevakasha.
So, this will be Sigal's last facilitation of this particular project and other projects. So just a few words. Sigal, I think of you as the Fader sandwich generation. You shared a special relationship with my dad for so many years as a student, as a co-servant of this kehillah, and ultimately as a dear friend. And Batya, I can't even begin, together with her friends, please know how much you have meant to her. And I'm somewhere in the sandwich, probably eating it. You stand beside such significant players in our history who declared, Hineni, I'm here, count on me, right up there with Avraham, Hannah, Moshe, Miriam, and Henrietta Zold. You shared and continued to share the hopes and dreams of all the young lives you've touched, including the Shinshanim, through your profound, caring, the inviting community you created, and your role as a model educator. You won't be standing anymore on the bima singing Adon Olam with Bet Tikva's youth. But I know that your classroom will be a sanctuary for those students who will be blessed and be able to call you Morati. Sigal, Ali, Behatzlichi.
Thank you very, very much. Toda, toda.
Okay. Anybody want to discuss what I just said? Okay. Okay, good to see you all. In 2 days, we will welcome Rosh Chodesh Elul. And with that, a daily blowing of the shofar, one sound, culminating in the varied sounds of the shofar during the days of awe, the Yamim Noraim. We will once again set before us the image of God as Avinu Malkenu, our Father, our King, an image we're used to. But what image do we have of ourselves as we stand before Him and speak intimately? The shofar is a call to do a cheshbon hanefesh, an examination of our soul, on the opportunity for spiritual and ethical introspection, hopefully leading to self-improvement and the mending of ourselves, our families, our community, our people, and the world. Mending, fixing, an impossibly difficult task. Yet, the opening shofar sound of Tkiyah, says Avraham Feder, may serve as a strong assertion of confidence in our capacity to fulfill our resolutions. But then come the less assertive sounds of Truah and Shvarim. These shofar sounds reflect an ongoing tension, he suggests. Are we defined by our weaknesses, failings, or by our positive powers? as we go through life? Do we fight to avoid despair? Or do we reign and resign ourselves to the groans of the shvarim sounds? Avraham Feder, when talking about the conflict between beauty and destruction, shares the following. I am reminded of an incident in Yerushalayim that took place toward the end of the war against Saddam Hussein's Iraq. Scuds had been raining down on Israel, and dutifully we donned our gas masks whenever we heard the shrill sounds of the warning sirens. Zubin Mehta and the Israeli Philharmonic, along with the virtuoso violinist Isaac Stern, had come to Jerusalem to offer a morale-building concert. I attended the concert. As Stern was playing the sublimely beautiful slow movement of Mozart's Third Violin Concerto, our attention was suddenly diverted by a competing sound, the by now familiar sirens threatening war. I was struck by the conflicting sounds of Mozart's music and the alarming portent of sirens. To my mind, it was a symbolic conflict between the forces of aesthetic beauty and brutal destruction. There it was, man's singular attempt to counter humanly initiated evil with the supreme achievement, human achievement of art. In those moments, I realized that this conflict cried out for resolution, yet it couldn't be resolved. Not without the decisive help of a third sound. Yes, the sound of the shofar. This sound would have to temper our rage at heaven and direct our commitment to the task of mending the world. I remember that vividly, describing that orally. It's a metaphor, but it really sums it up so beautifully. If we are to reflect on our character, and self-evaluate and resolve to change, we must be aware of the conflict between the godly call to humane living and animal drives that pull us down. What are our weaknesses? Our potential strengths? These are things that we should be thinking about all the time, but certainly as we approach the Yamim Noraim. So I'm going to focus on a select few of those weaknesses and powers that three thinkers affirm we struggle with. Note, please, you might not own each one of these weaknesses, but remember our tradition of thinking and praying in the first person plural. Anachnu, aleinu l'shabeach, al chet shechatanu, not chatati. I personally have known all three thinkers. Eliezer Schweid, who was often quoted the first 15 years of Bet Tikva during a sermon, was my professor at Hebrew University, both during my BA and my MA. And if we're talking about Hebrew, Marlene, we described his Hebrew as Ivrit Shabbat, a beautiful, beautiful Hebrew. I didn't even try to take notes. I believe my father owned every one of his probably 30 at least books. And they became friends as they dove into the little shtibel toward the end of my father's life. Life is very funny. Aleph, Yoshua Heschel, Abraham Joshua Heschel, the great thinker who shares my father's name. They were both named after the same Rebbe. He actually spent a Rosh Hashanah dinner with us in New Haven, Connecticut, when my father was a chazan and the shul was in between rabbis, and he was brought on as the rabbi. There was another one who would announce pages. And I'll never forget, just to share one story about this incredible scholar. When my father, as the chazan and the president of the synagogue, flew up to Dartmouth College that summer to speak with Heschel, where he was teaching, at one point, they're walking and the president said, well, we have half an hour. How are we going to kill the time? And Heschel grabbed his arm and said, do not ever use that phrase again. And the third person, well, we all know his most important job was to be Abba. And I suppose with Tzipora here too, Baal and Batya, Saba. And if Hila's listening, and Saba. So let's continue. What would you say is the biggest difference? And please remember, you can unmute yourselves. What would you say is the biggest difference between a holiday and a Yom Chol, a regular day? What first comes to your mind? Remember, there are no right or wrong answers. So a young woman sitting next to me said, no work, no school. Anybody else?
For time for reflection, just time for the important things.
Okay.
Not the mundane.
Okay. Anybody else? So I would say that that is very true. We don't have time, and the weekdays are filled to capacity with mundane things. But at another time, we'll discuss my belief that even though they're mundane, those things 6 days a week are important as well. Yes, we don't have time, too much time for reflection, and that's one of the key things we do on a holiday. Please look at text number 2. Ordinary secular days are themselves days of activity that fulfill life's demands. But from the standpoint of man's status or his destiny, they are days that do not contain, as Tzipora said, an ongoing scrutiny into the meaning of deeds. They include many moments of mechanical routine, many moments of utter happenstance, many moments of undirected motion, many vacuums in which the momentum of physical activity is not accompanied by attention to design or an intentional orientation of specific significance. On the other hand, holidays aspire to days of destiny and the fullness of deeds laden with meaning. He goes on, Schweid, at the end of that chapter in the book, this is taken from, to point out that one of the purposes of a holiday, whichever it is to, yes, leave the routine, but only for the purpose of returning to the routine after the holiday, maybe a bit changed. We are meant to hold on to Shabbat. And we know that because as soon as it's over, we already start counting Aleph b'Shabbat, Bet b'Shabbat, Rishon, Sheni, and Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. We're already thinking of that every day when we go like this, once at least a day in the Amidah. So we need these days, both these days, but they are certainly related. So let's begin to suggest some human weaknesses. Let's begin with number 3. The Bible, Heschel says, is an answer to the question, what does God require of man? But to modern man, this question is suppressed by another one, namely, what does man demand of God? Modern man continues to ponder, what will I get out of life? What escapes his attention is the fundamental yet forgotten question, what will life get out of me? To be an iconoclast of idealized needs, to defy our own immoral interests, though they seem to be vital and have long been cherished, we must be able to say no to ourselves in the name of a higher yes. This indeed is the purpose of our religious traditions, to keep alive the higher yes, as well as the power of man and woman to say, Hineni, here I am, experiencing the liberation from the tyranny of the self-centered ego. Now remember, I feel the need to repeat what I said earlier. This doesn't mean that everyone is just self-centered. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't have some self-centeredness, but we all understand that we're talking here about it going beyond where it should be. And that's for us to decide. Not just whether I'm guilty of this, is in general society reflected in Heschel's words. How are we educating the younger generation, whether it's in North America or whether it's in Israel? Let's give this thought. And he goes on, the young person of today is pampered. In moments of crisis, he transfers his guilt to others, society, the age, or his mother is blamed for his failure. Weakened by self-indulgence, he breaks down easily under hardship. What do you think of this? Be honest, even if you disagree, But please, what's your reaction to this?
No, so some people are very self-inclined and self-indulgent, and they forget that they have a responsibility and that they have to take care of themselves. You know, it's not everyone, but there seem to be an awful lot of people who are narcissistic, we'll say.
Okay. What do we do about that? Somebody, I see Bernice. No, I thought I saw a hand. Okay, anyone else? Do you think that Heschel is correct in his diagnosis?
I think that Heschel is more than correct in his, especially in his analysis in the last paragraph. And I think that it is actually the situation with young people today is getting worse. We live in an age of helicopter parenting, and it's affecting all areas of our society.
I think if we look at what's happening with the, you know, the Black Lives Matter and the way that the riots have come everywhere, both in Canada, the US, and in Israel, you know, there's sort of an abandonment of any kind of sense of responsibility or care about what's going on.
I actually think it's a bit too much of a generalization. I think that probably there are people and individual segments of society, but I will look at it the other way. I think that I've seen amazing resilience certainly in this crisis period, of young people who have been pampered and have gotten everything they've ever wanted, and yet they've risen to the occasion. He wrote this, he must have written this in the 60s, and I guess every generation has this kind of opportunity to look at ourselves and say, you know what, we've been too soft. We have in many ways. We all wanted our children to grow up to be happy, and have everything they wanted, and I'm sure our parents wanted the same thing for us. Only, you know, circumstances might have been different. I think it's a cautionary note for our society, and one not to be taken lightly. But I don't think it's fair to blanket everyone with the same pronouncement or same judgment, I guess is the word, judgment.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's continue, because Avraham Feder is again going to continue Heschel's thought. Human beings are meant to have free will with which they can either obey or disobey God's will. The primordial serpent, who in later Jewish theology will be identified as the Yetzer Hara, the evil impulse, the evil drive, is the force intended to entice the human being to challenge and even to rebel against God's creative order. But the act of challenging or rebelling, whether the agent is the serpent or the human being, is still not self-worship. We know, in fact, that Avraham, he was in no way chastised for arguing with God, questioning his sense of justice. So to rebel, to question God, that's one thing. That's not the self-worship that Heschel and this Heschel are nervous about. When, however, the agent moves from challenging or rebelling against God's order to setting up his own order and becoming his own master, denying any system of value judgments beyond his own, he has then declared himself a God. And here then is the self-worship that lies at the core of idolatry at its most pernicious. And if our openness to idolatry does not entrap us in the worship of ourselves, then we worship others. And so, rising every day to become engaged with the world and all that's in it, I not only acknowledge the Creator for the gift of life, I insist, Feder says, I insist upon addressing God as sovereign, as the exclusive sovereign of the world. Melech Chai V'Kayam. What are those words from? The first words that we are meant to say as soon as we wake up. And this was written in an article, in a book actually, that was entirely about that tefillah modeh ani. And that 12-word tefillah, we say, Modani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam, shechazarta bi nishmati b'chemla rabbai minotecha. I thank you, living and eternal King, for giving me back my soul in mercy, Rabbah emunatecha, and great is your faithfulness. Well, it's known that people, many people, have an issue with being able to express gratitude or even feel gratitude. Why is that? Anybody want to suggest? Why is it not an easy thing to just feel grateful, to show it, to express it? And again, keep in mind, we're not generalizing, it's just there are certain people that do have a problem with it. Why would that be? I'm not talking about being shy and so you can't say thank you.
Is there a sense of Megillah that doesn't allow someone to be grateful?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part of what you said,
Is
Tzipora.
there a sense of Megillah that would...
Magia li, Marlene, is another expression that many people on both sides of the ocean say, Magia li, I deserve that. It's coming to me. I think there are those who do have that sense. I've earned it, and somehow I've built it, and don't have this sense of, yes, I did it, and I was needed, but it was with God's help, with God's help. You know, please God, we'll be celebrating Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and those are very serious, not sad, but serious. And then we immediately have Sukkot, which is, one of the names is to be happy, not Simchat Torah, but Sukkot. And it's a natural time to be happy because hopefully the farmers have brought in successful harvests. But one of the reasons that even the citizen in the Torah, it says, of Israel was meant to give thanks is because it's a weakness of human beings when you're feeling successful to forget about saying, I didn't do this alone. Absolutely, absolutely. And if we tend to do that, we lose not just appreciation, but we lose a sense of humility. Now, this modeh ani, it ends with those words that I just said, and we thank you, God, for the great faithfulness. And that's how it ends. And there are many theories about what that possibly means. We're thanking you for your great faithfulness. The one that is dearest to Avraham and Bracha Feder is that God is saying, I'm letting you wake up again because I have faith in you, you human being. That's amazing. And we have to realize that. And if you wake up feeling that God has faith in me, that should set the tone for what your day is going to look like. And if I put that together with Netilat Yadayim, the first Netilat Yadayim of the day, with not related to eating bread, it's a way of saying, my hands are going to do amazing things and I need to prepare them for that. It's all an attitude. All an attitude that can make us go higher, higher. And let's continue. This leads us into another comment by Heschel, A.J. Heschel. When Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai asked his disciples, which is the worst quality a man should shun, Rabbi Shimon answered, one who borrows and does not repay. It is the same whether one borrows from man or from God. Perhaps this is the essence of human misery. To forget that life is a gift as well as a trust. It's very connected to this sense of appreciation, of feeling gratitude. But it says it in a bit of a different way. I'm sorry, somebody just knocked at the door. Close it. Okay. So if we're talking about uneasiness with saying thank you, it's for another reason, not just that magia li, that I deserve it. Heschel suggests another reason. The modern man, he says, does not know how to stand still, how to appreciate a moment, an event for its own sake. When witnessing an important event or confronted with a beautiful sight, all he does is take a picture. And this was written, as you said, in the 60s. So what Heschel is describing is another issue, and certainly of our time. They joke about people taking a selfie and in the selfie hiding the Leaning Tower. And that says something. But another weakness is sometimes not even taking the time during our free time. And let's go on. This is very interesting, as the others are as well. So, following Chet HaEgel, the golden calf incident, Moshe talks to Bnei Israel. Cut away, says Moshe, therefore, the thickening about your hearts and stiffen your necks no more. Kshe oref. You know that expression. We're described as an am kshe oref, a stiff-necked people. Don't do that, he says. Moshe and his people know what a stiff neck is. One cannot move it without experiencing pain. To look to be stiff-necked, therefore, is to voluntarily invite restrictive views, limited perspectives, debilitating pain and suffering. Only when one can turn his neck from side to side, up and down, with ease, is one able to see the world from different angles, sufficient to maneuver successfully within that world. What is being said here? Because I think what's being said here is very different from what we usually think about when we hear, we're a stiff-necked people. What is being said here? What's wrong with us being stiff-necked and not turning? I want somebody else to see it. And it's a weakness, because if we don't get rid of that stiff neck, well, we won't grow. There won't be a chance of talking to others.
Is this an indication of one's closed-mindedness?
That's what I see. That's what I see.
Oy.
He goes on to share a rather lengthy story from the Talmud, in where a Rabbi Yanai invites a common person into his home for a meal. And during the dinner, he's asking this guest different questions as if he's testing him, and he knows no answers. But the guest does refer to the many acts of chesed that he does. And the rabbi, who was asking really simple questions, whether it was a motzi or whatever, yalla, okay, gets annoyed and he kicks him out. Now, that does not speak well of the rabbi. He goes on to say, it definitely doesn't. But Feder goes on to question, listen to this. He said, yeah, the rabbi should not have treated him like that, but those are kinds of questions that even a simple person should have known the answers to. And if he doesn't know it, it means that he's not studying anymore, like all of you who continue to study, to study, to study. And he claims that that is a weakness. Because if you don't continually study, whatever it is, you've said, I know everything, and there's no room for me to develop. So he suggests that that's a weakness. That's a weakness. And as a teacher, I'm particularly sensitive to that. And as a student, I'll just share, as Batu was studying Zoom classes, so one of them, which was a history of different genres of dance, I at first sat next to her thinking she might need some help with Hebrew. And after a while, that wasn't necessary, but I stayed on throughout the term because it was an introduction to me of a world that I had never been a part of. And I said, there is so much to learn. Whether it's for entertainment, whether it's for furthering our utilitarian knowledge, or just Torah Lishma. A weakness that can easily be taken care of. Next. Heschel raises another weakness. In the solitude of self-reflection, the self may seem to be a fountain of beautiful thoughts and ideals. Yet thought may be a spell, and ideals may be worn like borrowed diadems. It is in deeds that man becomes aware of what his life really is, of his power to harm and to hurt, to wreck and to ruin, of his ability to derive joy and to bestow it upon others. The heart is revealed in the deeds. Infinite are the consequences of our actions, yet finite is our wisdom. Both body and soul must participate in carrying out a ritual. So at first, he has said, it's not enough to keep it in our head. We have to act upon our thoughts, deeds. But now he goes on to yet another problem of compartmentalizing and thinking we can act and not feel, or feel and not do. Both body and soul must participate in carrying out a ritual, a law. A good deed consists not only in what, but also in how we do it. There is a sure way of missing the meaning of the law by either, two great words, by either atomization or generalization, by seeing the parts without the whole, or by seeing the whole without the parts. Without saying, shake your head, nod your head, if you can think of examples of where that takes place. I think that speaks to real problems of people not seeing the bigger picture, whether it's halakha or whether it's civil law, or people thinking, not feeling it has to be put into action. Real issues. Anybody?
Bracha, sometimes it's just menschlichkeit, like people just aren't menschy about what they think they're trying to do because they're not putting the pieces together.
Well,
considering the whole.
But if it ends up not being menschlich,
No, then it's wrong. Yeah.
it's wrong. But what I'm suggesting, or what Heschel's suggesting, is that there are people who just don't see that the two go together.
Yeah,
The
no,
two go together.
I agree. I agree.
Okay, that's good, because you didn't agree with something earlier.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's true. I didn't.
okay.
I'm entitled to that.
You are entitled. You are entitled. Anybody else?
For me, this speaks to the idea of compassion and passion. Like doing something without feeling really loses the value, or it's like, and also just talking and not doing, it's like you need to walk your talk. You can't just talk and not do, because that's not in synchrony to me. So to say something good to someone, but without some heart, or not to do good, to me doesn't mean anything, or means very little.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I've said more than once to this group, if not on the Zooming earlier, that there are verses in the Torah, psukim, that give a specific instruction. And then it ends the pasuk with the words, V'asita hayashar v'hatov. Do what is right and good. And you wonder, why is that necessary? And I always take that to mean that there are times that I have to look at what the bigger picture is, and maybe in that specific circumstance, I'm going to have to adapt what that particular law says. It's called not having a Rosh Katan, but having a Rosh Gadol. Rosh Katan literally means a small head, but it means much more than that, that you're just, it doesn't make sense. How could you think that God would want you to do that when we know that God wants this? Using your head, using your head. Okay, and let's move on. Schweid here continues this discussion about an unwanted compartmentalization, which often brings a dichotomy between, as we said, acts and the cognitive or the emotional. And he gives us a bit of a history of kaparot and vidui, atonement and confession. Schweid says, atonement and confession, phrased in mitzvah-like or legal terms, are located in the priestly code. The sources clearly show that atonement is a highly ritualistic act that involves the offering of sacrifices. The sinner who wishes to be exonerated brings an animal offering, places his hands on its head, and confesses. The priest slaughters the offering and sprinkles its blood on the altar. The act of sprinkling the blood atones for the sin. In contrast, there is no reference to ritual in the prophet's call to repentance. Rather, it is religious and ethical. While the prophets are not opposed to the ritual itself, they are opposed to the belief that the ritual per se can effect atonement without repentance. The ritual act, as we just heard, has no value unless accompanied by psychological, social, and moral deeds. And we know that the prophets, time again and again, get upset with Bnei Israel because they thought that they could go offer 3 times a day a sacrifice, pray to God, but then not know how to treat the most vulnerable in society, the widow, the orphan, the poor. So Schweid is just heightening for us this sense of what Heschel had said a little earlier. Now, another weakness. We'll read together, they go together, Feder and Schweid. Think about it. If I were to ask you, as I'm asking you now, what place does criticism have in our lives? Do we offer criticism? Do we accept it? Or do we know how to criticize? In order to maintain, text number 9, in order to maintain a dynamic push toward creative application of holiness in society as lived, each member of society is to be considered responsible for everyone else. And that's the step that has to occur before you criticize. We should feel, everyone in society and in whatever community you are, we feel a sense of responsibility for the other. Whether that's true or not, but they are suggesting yes. Therefore, Moses commands, reprove your kinsman so that you incur no guilt because of him. What that means is two things. Criticize, but criticize in a way that isn't going to be harmful. But be sure to criticize, because if you don't, you are going to let that person be hurt if you don't point out something that he should or she should stop doing. And that will also impact on you. So again, therefore Moses commands, tochiach, you know the word tochecha, reprove your kinsman so that you incur no guilt because of him. He who might consider himself innocent is not at all innocent if the rest of humanity is failing spiritually and morally. So I might feel that I'm okay, and it's not my business. And I'm not going to criticize, not a friend, not a family member, not someone at work, not someone in the Knesset, not someone in the different communities I'm a part of, and I'll stick to myself. No, we've been told that is not our tradition. Schweid, in 10, it should be noted that while the confession is an individual prayer, it is not said, as we began tonight, in the singular, but in the plural. Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu. Now, that long list, there's no way, again, that any of us, certainly not in this Zoom, is guilty of all those things. But we still say it because we are thinking of everyone else and concerned and caring. It is not said in the singular, but in the plural. The confessing individual assumes responsibility for the sins of the entire public. What do you think of this, guys? And think, you don't have to say out loud, do you criticize enough? Do you let people criticize you? We're told in the Talmud there's discussion between three rabbis, and Rabbi Tarfon said he doubted that anyone in his generation was capable of giving reproof. And Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah said he didn't think anybody was capable of accepting reproof. And Rabbi Akiva said he didn't think that people knew how to give reproof. So where do you stand on criticism before we give our concluding comment? Anybody?
Yeah, I just wanted to say in Hila's name that it has to all begin with self-criticism in order to make us stronger before we go on to the next step.
Hila, can't everybody see you? I mention you. Come on.
She's not dressed appropriately.
Not dressed appropriately? Okay.
Anyway, Hila.
Hila, absolutely right. This is the 18-year-old that I said is about to serve her country in the Defense, Ministry of Defense. She will be making decisions about Abu Dhabi, okay? Now, absolutely. That is, of course, where you have to begin. And some people have a problem with that. We know that for sure. You're young and yet you've already come to know that. And that's what this season is all about. Taking a look at ourselves. And again, I would urge you to remember that we don't leave it up to just Elul and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur to do that self-evaluation. There's opportunity to do that whenever we want, but in our tefillah of the daily service, there are a few tefillot that we show we are thinking about our behavior. If anything, I believe that tefillot are more for us, I believe, than even HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because they're ways of reminding us to think about our behavior. Do I do this? Do I visit the sick? Do I buy a gown for a needy bride? And so on and so forth. Yeah. So I would conclude, sometimes there are people, when they hear that we have weaknesses, they take that as an excuse that I don't have to try so hard to change things. Nothing is going to get better. That is so un-Jewish. Whether it's on the personal or the national level, we wouldn't go through this if we didn't constantly have tikva, hope. And Avraham Yoshua Heschel Fader will conclude our evening with this optimism, speaking on the level of Am Yisrael, but I know he believes this for each individual as well. We, children of Israel, have never given up on the vision of life in this world as potentially good. As tempting as it has been to look upon this world as hopelessly fallen because of its relentless struggle between the forces of good and evil, we have rejected efforts to escape the struggle. Our covenant with God, the Creator, won't permit it. Our covenant with our fellow man, who shares life with us in this world today and tomorrow, won't permit it. Thank you very much.
Bracha?
Zipporah? Yes.
May I take a minute or two to talk about Avraham Feder and Eliezer Schweid and how they met? Do we have a minute for that?
I'm here. Go ahead. I didn't. Go ahead.
We moved into the Abu Tor neighborhood within a week of our wedding. And Avraham, my new husband, started in this little stable shul just underneath our building almost. And he always took a book to read in the parts where he knew he could sit and read a book, whatever it was. And one morning, not so long after he had started to attend that synagogue, he was sitting reading this book at a particular point, and someone tapped him on the shoulder and said, "I see you're reading Eliezer Schweid." And he said, "Yes." He says, "He's sitting right next to you." And Avraham had never met this man, but he had been quoting him in his sermons for all these years. And actually, I counted the books. There were 22 books, most in Hebrew, but some in English, and in Avraham's collection. He was so thrilled when he walked in the house that morning from shul. He was like a kid. You could have pulled him off the ceiling. He was so thrilled. And so they came as guests to our home. We were guests in their home. And one morning, he was sitting in shul, and somebody came and said, "It's Eliezer Schweid's 80th birthday. Would you say a few words?" Well, Avraham Feder liked to be prepared, and he wasn't prepared. And he was, but said no to start with, and then he said, "I will do this." And of course, in Hebrew, he made the little I have to say I wasn't there because that little shtibel shul, the women sat outside, literally outside of the shul. So I really didn't go. I used to wait for him to come home or walk over and walk him home. And the two of them, and I always knew when he was late, when it was Elliot, the two guys would be face to face talking about whatever after shul. it was a very, very thrilling moment for Avraham Feder to be with this man whom he had read every word in both languages and had quoted over all of those years. And I wanted to share that story.
I'm not going to let you get the last word. As long as you said that, Sipora, I have to share one more. So my father had received, Schweid had given him a gift of his latest book.
Yes.
And then I asked my father when I was in town during the summer, and did you give him your latest book? And he said, no. Well, and my father did not have another copy. So I found out where the publisher was, near the Tachana Merkazit.
Yes.
And
You're
I
talking
went
about
there.
Torah through Zionist vision.
I went there and I picked up a copy and made sure
I didn't know.
that my father delivered it to
I didn't know that.
Eliezer Schweid.
I didn't know that.
And I actually have a copy of 2 letters, communication between the 2 of them about their books
Oh,
in Hebrew.
yeah, wonderful.
Anyway, okay.
Two great men who
Indeed.
came together in their 80s. Two wonderful, great men. Yeah.
Amen. Everyone, please stay well. And it's been great as usual. Take care.
See you next week, Bracha.
Yeah.
Yasher koach. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Excellent class, Bracha.
Thank you. Thank you.
יוצא מן הכלל, ממש יוצא מן הכלל.
תודה.